كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. So today, inshallah, hopefully we'll be finishing the rest of the discussion of this nafaqat chapter. So we'll move on regarding who has to give nafaqah to the parents if the child is there as well as other relatives are there. If there is a child and other relatives as well, like grandparents and everybody else there, or the uncles and everybody else, who gives nafaqah, right? Who is the person that needs to give nafaqah? So we'll talk about that inshallah today. We'll also go on to mention who do you have to give nafaqah to? Who are the people that you give nafaqah to? So there's a bit of a ruling that's going to be mentioned there. Then how much nafaqah do you have to give? What's the amount that you have to pay? That we'll talk about. Then there'll be a clarification, a ruling. We'll do a little clarification from the Quduri. What the Quduri mentions is actually not the fatwa, so we'll talk about that. Then, inshallah, what we'll do is we'll go through a comprehensive discussion of what Allama Maidani mentions in regards to the full general rule regarding who pays nafaqah, right? In the presence of multiple relatives, who is the one that pays nafaqah to this poor person, right? So that is something I would really advise all of you to sit there with a pen, paper, and write it all down, because it does get a little bit complicated, but once you've worked it all out, it becomes really, I will try to explain to you why it's like that. So inshallah, it will become really easy. It will be very logical and comprehensible as to how it works, inshallah. So all the nafaqat will become really simple if you understand that concept. Then we'll just finish off a few more rulings in regards to the nafaqat, and he'll go through some rulings of if there is the difference in religion. If there's a difference in religion, then do you still owe nafaqah to that person or not, because they're different to you in religion? Likewise, we will go through what does it mean by, meaning when you have to pay nafaqah is only if you are able to pay, you're rich enough to pay. So what does it mean by being rich enough to pay? So we'll talk about that, where different people have mentioned different definitions. And then if the son has gone missing, then in that event, that what happens? Can the parents spend the money of the child that they've left behind? Likewise, if there's property that the child has left behind, any sort of property, movable, immovable, what happens to that? Meaning, can the parents do anything? Especially the father, in essence. We'll talk about that, inshallah. And then we will talk about a few more rulings at the end, just to brush up, just to finish off the rulings of expenditure on the parents as well as any other relative. The difference, I think this is going to be quite important, the difference between the nafaqah of the wife and the nafaqah of all these other relatives, whether it's the children, whether it's the parents, whether it's anybody else. Their nafaqah, what is the difference between them and the wife? There are a number of differences that we've done all along, but this is also a very key difference between them to understand conceptually what is the difference. So now, to move on to today's session, we start off with the ruling that if the child is now responsible, it's not going to be a child really, meaning it's not going to be a child's age, but obviously if a person is responsible to pay for their parents, right? So nobody else will be responsible with that son or daughter, in essence, right? So let's just say, to explain this ruling, let's just say a person is responsible to pay for their parents' nafaqah because the parents are unable to pay, right? So then this person can't say, for example, to some other relative as well, let's say, for instance, the father's parents are alive. So he says to his own grandparents that, oh, this is my father or my daughter, my mother is also your son. Or if he says it to his maternal grandparents, that this is your daughter as well. So I will pay a part of the nafaqah, but you also have to pay a part of the nafaqah, so we'll both make up the pot in essence. So this is not how it works. When it comes to the children, they have to pay the nafaqah to their parents fully. Yeah, and then nobody else that shares with them that responsibility to pay the nafaqah. So hopefully this makes sense. So for instance, they say to their uncle, their father's brother, who may be rich, that, oh, you're rich, so you have to pay my father nafaqah. No, when it comes to the responsibility being upon the child, that responsibility will solely be upon that child, and that child will pay. Obviously, it's not that they will be an immature child, because then that's not the point here. We're just calling them a child because they will be the child of their parent who they're paying the nafaqah for in terms of relationship. So the reason why this is the case, whereas in other relatives it works slightly different, which we will talk about later, but when it comes to children, they pay the nafaqah of their parents fully, like it's their full responsibility. The reason being is because there is indication, like for example in places such as in the hadith where Rasulullah said, famous hadith is anta wa maluka li abik, you and your father belong to your father, your wealth belongs to your father. So you and your wealth belongs to your father. So that means that your wealth also belongs to your father to a degree. Obviously, it doesn't mean that it completely, like, it belongs to you, it belongs to them like that. It's slightly different, meaning they have some sort of, say in your wealth. So because that is already something which is proven through the nas, through textual evidence, and secondly because they are the closest to you, your parents are the closest to you in kin, in relationship, that's why that child or yourself will have to pay for your parents' nafaqah fully. But that's obviously, like we said previously, the parents' nafaqah will only be due if the parents are not able to look after themselves, in terms they're not able to afford the nafaqah themselves. If they have enough that they can pay for their own nafaqah, then nobody needs to pay for their nafaqah. They will use their own money for that nafaqah. It's only the wife that you pay nafaqah to, despite her having wealth. So hopefully this becomes clear. Now, a ruling that's quite important to understand, which a lot of people don't get the understanding of, is that in terms of males and females, sons and daughters, they will equally share the responsibility, they will equally pay towards the nafaqah of the parents. Having said that, that does mean that this son and this daughter must have the ability to be able to. That's generally the case in anywhere besides the wife's case, that when you are paying nafaqah of somebody else besides the wife, whether it be parents, whether it be your own children, whether it be whoever else, the idea of their nafaqah is that you have to be able to afford that nafaqah, right? Well, children work slightly differently as well, which we mentioned already about. But in regards to parents, you have to be able to afford that, right? So therefore, the son and the daughter will equally share that responsibility. So it's not just the responsibility of the son, right? Nor is it more the responsibility of the son more than it is the daughters, because at the end of the day, the reason why you pay them nafaqah and you look after them is because they're your parents. And from the perspective that they're your parents and you're their children, that connection, that relationship, that kin relationship is the same in a son and in a daughter. They're both children, and for them children, in relation to them children, these are your parents. So that nafaqah has to be paid equally, and this is the zahirul riwayah, meaning this is what's mentioned in the manifest transmission of the madhab, which is from Imam Muhammad rahmatullahi alayh, mentioning from Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayh. And hopefully everyone understands that mas'ala. Now, some people have tried to mention that no, just as in inheritance, because it will come later regarding this nafaqa, being due on relatives according to mirath. So some people have understood that just because the inheritance is shared by way of 2-to-1 ratio between the son and daughter, so that son gets double the share of the لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, double the share of the daughter, meaning double the share of his sister. So in relation to parents, if the parents passed away, the inheritance that's split between the children is 2-to-1. So then some people have said that is the way, like Hassan ibn Ziyad mentions from Imam Hanifa, that's the way that they have to pay nafaqah. So if, for example, they had to pay, for argument's sake, £60 per week, then the son would have to pay £40 and the daughter will pay £20 towards that pot. So the son will give double the amount that the daughter will give, and that's an opinion that's mentioned of Hassan ibn Ziyad, but that is not the fatwa of the madhab. The fatwa of the madhab, as mentioned by Imam Muhammad, like I said in the Zahir riwayah, is that they both pay equally. So if they had to pay £60, like I said, weekly, then they would have to pay equally £30 and £30. Each one will pay £30 and they'll put that into the account, the pot, that the parents will then take from their nafaqah. Hopefully this makes sense. Like I said previously, this does mean that the son as well as the daughter must have that money, or that whatever it is, like we prayed before, the excess, to be able to pay that towards their parents. Obviously, if one of them are really poor themselves, they're unable to afford paying nafaqah like this, they're poor themselves, then obviously they will not be able to pay. Then the burden will be upon the one who is able to pay. But if they're able to pay, then this is the way that nafaqah works. Now we move on, that the nafaqah is to understand, that was regarding the parents, and that's all done. Now the nafaqah of other relatives, and who out of the relatives gets nafaqah. So nafaqah is wajib to give. So just put yourselves in the shoes. You have to pay nafaqah to every womb relative, any relative that's related to you through womb, meaning blood relative, who is a mahram from the relationship of the womb, meaning because they were given birth to by a certain person who is connected to you through blood relation, they become mahram to you through that relationship. I'll explain this further a little bit later, but just understand that for now first. Comprehend that. So it has to be the rahim. It has to be the rahim, meaning a person who's related through womb ties, and he is mahram minhu. Mahram, the mahramiyat is created through minhu, meaning through the womb relation. So that's important to understand, and I will again elaborate on that as we go through this ruling. So for every the rahim mahram, now I'll explain that when that you have to pay their nafaqah. But when you pay their nafaqah, if they are, qualification number one, if they are a minor and they are poor, poverty will always be there. Remember, poverty overarches everything. So if they're minor but they're rich, then you don't give them nafaqah. Why? Because remember we prayed before that anybody who is able to afford their nafaqah themselves, nobody needs to give them nafaqah. Their money will be used on them first. So if they are minor but they're rich enough because they inherited a lot of something, then that money that they have of theirs will be used for their nafaqah. So the point is that they're minor as well as they're poor. That's number one, qualification number one. Qualification number two, if they are not minor, they are actually, mature now. So they are mature and they are poor as well, but now they need extra qualifications. So a mature person, if they are female, then automatically they will get nafaqah. As if they are female, they will be given nafaqah. So if they're male, they will not be given nafaqah. They will be told that, okay, you go and work, you go and earn, because the male is able to earn. The woman is not told, it's not an obligation on her to go and earn. So therefore, she will be taken care of. So if they are mature and they are poor, then they have to be women. That's the second qualification. Or they have to be disabled. So if they're not a woman, meaning they're a male obviously, but they're disabled or they're blind, then they will also be given nafaqah, provided the first qualifications already were met, meaning they were poor. That's if they were now mature, we're talking about. So hopefully these qualifications have been understood. Now, I did say I'll explain this qualification of the Rahim Mahram. So what it means is that the person is not just a womb relative who's a mahram, but that mahramiyat has to be through the womb relation. So let's just say there's a cousin brother, Ibnul Am, meaning your father's brother's son, or father's brother's daughter, right? So the cousin brother or cousin sister, they are not mahram, yes? They are not mahram. You can get married to them. Now, they are the rahim. They are the rahim, meaning they are womb relative, right? They're blood relation through your father's brother, and that's their son. So it's still a relative, it's still a blood relation. So it is the rahim, but it's not mahram. But then what happened? Mahramiyat created somehow, right? So let's say they got married to your sister, right? They became your brother-in-law, or they got married, or if it was a girl in relation to you, they got married to your brother, right? And now they become your sister-in-law. So, or forget that's not going to create mahramiyat, sorry. But let's just say they got married to your, let's say your son or your daughter, right? So then mahramiyat created from that, right? So now because mahramiyat created from them marriage, because you became their, father-in-law, or you became their, if it's a woman, then you became their mother-in-law. So mahramiyat is now created. So they are your dhi raham from the first place. They are now your mahram as well. But the point is, they're not mahram from the womb relative, from womb relation. Or an easier example, let's give an easier example, in fact. So if, for example, that cousin brother of yours or cousin sister of yours, yeah, they are your, like I said, they are your dhi rahim. They're a womb relative, but they're not mahram. But let's say both of you drank milk from the same mother. So now this person becomes your radha'i brother or sister. They become your milk brother or sister. So now mahramiyat will create, because you become brother and sister, right? So the mahramiyat will create. But the mahramiyat is through radha'a, is through milk relations, is not from womb relation. So that's what we mean when we say that it's a dhi rahim, it's a womb relative, it's a mahram, but the mahramiyat is through the womb relation. So that would mean like your uncle, your auntie, meaning your paternal, maternal, your ascendants, your descendants, your brother, your nephew, your niece, all of these kind of people who are your mahrams through blood relation. So these are the people we're talking about that you have to give nafaqah to. Okay? Hopefully this is understood. If there's anybody else like your cousin brother, you don't need to give nafaqah to them. Nafaqah is not owed for them. Okay? Because they are not your mahram through blood relation. Or somebody who's a relative but that's not your mahram. Or somebody who is your mahram but is not your blood relative, like your, like we talked about, like your radha'i family. You do not need to give them nafaqah. So hopefully this is fully understood in this regards. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Now we move on. Now, a slightly complex mas'ala as well, that the nafaqah that is due for these kind of relatives that we just talked about, the nafaqah will be due in accordance to the inheritance that they will get. So this is according to a rule in fiqh we call لِأَنَّ الْغُرْمُ بِالْغُنْمِ. The amount of liability that you have on you will be in accordance to the the amount that you receive. So like, just imagine you have partnership, right? In a business. So you have a partnership of 60-40. So the liability that you have is 60-40. So when you gain the profit share, that profit share you will gain will be 60-40 in accordance to the liability you have. You can't have a disproportionate amount of liability in comparison to the profit share, for example, right? So this is a general rule in fiqh. So in the same way over here, how much nafaqah do you owe to somebody is the amount that if they were to pass away, the proportion, meaning in ratio or in percentage, if they were to pass away, how much inheritance you will receive from them. Because you're gaining benefit from them by way of inheritance, to that proportion you will also give them, you are liable, you will give them nafaqah in essence. So this is a rule, you have to give as much as you will receive. Hopefully people understand this rule. So just to give you an example of this, he gives you a few examples. So he says the nafaqah of the he does give you this ruling. We'll cover this ruling and then we'll talk about this ruling after. So the Quduri mentions this ruling, that nafaqah of a mature daughter, right? The mature daughter, remember, because the up until their maturity, whilst they were immature, the father had to pay the full nafaqah, right? But now there is a difference of opinion here, that once the daughter has become mature, right? Likewise, the son who is mature and is disabled or is blind. So the nafaqah is due, according to what Quduri is mentioned, is nafaqah is due on the parents, on both the mother and the father, not just the father anymore. But how will they give this nafaqah? They will give it in thirds, meaning the father will pay 2/3 and the mother will pay 1/3. Because if this child was to pass away, leaving behind a father and a mother, the inheritance law is that mother will get 1/3 and the remainder will go to father. So father will get 2/3. So because this is the share of inheritance in terms of in relation to each other, there's only mother and father here in play. So the mother will also, when she gives nafaqah, she will give 1/3 and the father will give 2/3. So this is وَعَلَى الْوَارِثِ مِثْلُ ذَلِكَ. We are using this, that upon the warith is similar to that, is in accordance to what inheritance that they have to pay, that they're getting, they will have to give that. So that's what we understand from this verse, because Allah used the word warith, Allah used the word in the heir. So the heir, even if there is the sideways, that's because if there was sideways, if there's the hashia, they would be dropped, they wouldn't be considered anyway, right? With the ascendants and descendants being there, whether the brother, the sister, they are there, that doesn't matter, that's regardless. So that's why both the scenarios were the same. Now we move on to the next rule. The next rule is where there is no more descendants. Descendants are not in the picture, there are only ascendants. So if there's only ascendants, then if the father is there, the father has to pay full. And so what do? We consider who is the closest in terms of juz'iyya. Who is the closest in juz'iyya? So if they are equal in terms of the juz'iyya, they're both equal, then what do? We give preference in terms of who is the heir, who will be inheriting. So now let's just say, for example, if there was the maternal grandfather and there is a paternal grandfather, right? So they're both there. Then because in terms of juz'iyya, they're both the same, because to this person, they're related through one relative, meaning father, then you go up there, there's father's father. Then mother's father. So in terms of juz'iyya, they're both the same. How close they are to this person, exactly the same. So then what do? We look at inheritance. That who gets the inheritance? So obviously father's father is the one who gets the inheritance. The mother's father doesn't get, the maternal grandfather doesn't get inheritance. So the full nafaqah will be due on the paternal grandfather, the father's father, because obviously he's getting inheritance. So that's that ruling. Now, if both are heirs, what if both of them are inheriting? Then it will be in accordance to the inheritance share that they'll get, according to whatever inheritance share they'll get. So, for example, if there's a mother there, mother is there, and the grandfather is also there, right? So remember, because even though here we only look at the closest in relation. When we said that we look at the closest in relation, we'll only look at the closest in relation when there is the father there, in essence, right? Hopefully that made sense. When some of them are inheriting, then we don't look at, meaning because they are all inheriting, we don't look at who's just the father there. Meaning if the father is there, he overrules everything. But when the father is not there, that's when we're looking at these other concepts here. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's just say mother is there. We're doing the scenario, mother is there and grandfather is there, meaning father's father is there. Okay? So the paternal grandfather is there. So then we look at the inheritance, right? So in inheritance, what happens? The mother gets 1/3 and the grandfather will get the 2/3 because he takes the place of the father, right? So when they give the nafaqah again, they will give in accordance to that. The mother will give 1/3 of the share. The grandfather, the paternal grandfather, will give 2/3 of the share. So hopefully that makes this clear. Well, that is when there is only ascendants, right? Now, when there are ascendants with the hawashi, with the sideways, in essence, brother, sister, they're there as well. So now, if one of the two types, either the sideways or the ascendants, they're not inheriting, right? Then we consider, because one of them are not inheriting, so we can't really consider inheritance there, yeah? So then we just consider the ascendants. We just consider whoever the ascendant is, we consider them to be alone. They're the ones who are going to pay. Even though they're not going to inherit, even if they're not going to inherit. So for example, if there is the maternal grandfather, there's a maternal grandfather, and then there is a paternal uncle, father's brother, right? So you've got father's brother, and you've got a maternal mother's father, right? Maternal grandfather. So in terms of inheritance, the uncle will get it, right? The paternal uncle will get the inheritance. But in terms of the inheritance, nothing will go to the maternal grandfather. So because nothing will go to him, we can't really consider inheritance that according to inheritance ratio, yes? So what we're going to have to do, we consider just the fact that he's an asal, he's an ascendant. So ascendants obviously going to be getting preference. They're going to have to give, and the uncle, he's not going to give because he's sideways, right? So he's a further relative anyway. So the grandfather's obviously closer. So the grandfather will have to give the nafaqah here. So this is an example of where, though he is not the one that's getting the inheritance, because if there was no uncle or anybody in the picture, then maybe the grandfather would have got the nafaqah, right? So the idea is he was able to get inheritance. So it doesn't break the original rule that we talked about, right? So he's able to get but he's just not getting it in this scenario because there's somebody else that's going to get it before him. So hopefully this makes sense that the grandfather is the one who has to pay the nafaqah in that scenario. Now, if both inherit, so if there is ascendant and there is also sideways and both inherit, so that's when we consider the share of inheritance, because they are both inheriting, so we can in essence see the shares of inheritance and get them to give in accordance to that. So for example, let's just say an example is if there's a mother, she's ascendant, and there is a brother. Okay, so the mother is there and a full brother, for example, is there. So inheritance share will be mother will get 1/3 and the brother will get 2/3, the remainder. So when they give the nafaqah, they will give in accordance to that in terms of the ratio. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, if there are only the sideways, there's only brothers or something, right? Then you consider whoever is the heir is the one has to give. So if the brother is there as well as the nephew is there, then the brother is the one who takes the inheritance. So the brother is the one who has to pay. Or if there's a brother there and an uncle there, paternal uncle, then the brother is the one who takes the inheritance. So the brother will have to give nafaqah. So it's simple, very simple over here. So hopefully that will give you a comprehensive understanding. It may be a bit complicated, but I said to write it all down so it makes it easy for you to comprehend all of that. Now, he just gives you a few rulings to complete the book. So we're just going to do a few of them, inshallah. Hopefully we should complete this now. So, if there is a difference in religion, then we already covered this ruling, then the nafaqah will not be due for them now, for these kind of relatives. Because remember, the only relatives that get is parents, the wife, the parents, and the children. They're the only ones who get if there's a difference of religion. But here, in all of these types of relatives, they won't get. And likewise, if the person himself is pure, then he doesn't need to pay, the other person, because they're poor themselves. They're owed nafaqah by somebody else. How are they going to be obliged to give nafaqah to this person? So nafaqah of the person is only due when a person is able to afford, like we've already prayed before. Now, it does clarify a little concept here, which is important. That what does it mean by able to afford? So what it means is that a person has to have enough that after they've done their own expenditure or their immediate families, their children's expenditure or their wife's expenditure, they have something left. However much they have left over, according to that, they are that rich in essence, right? So they have to give that much at least into the pot to be able to afford to give to the other person. So hopefully this makes sense. Then he mentions that if the child has gone missing, meaning the son's gone missing, for example, and he owes nafaqah to his parents, for example, right? Then the same ruling as we did for the wife. So if the parents now, there's wealth that the son, for example, has left behind, the parents can use that money for their nafaqah. And that is hopefully understood. Now, there's a rule here that the father, because he has the right, when in the absence of the son, he has a right to look after the property of the son. So any movable items, right? Not even immovable, not real estate, So movable, like for example, a car or something that needs to be looked after, like an animal or something, right? The son has left behind this. So the easiest example is to work with the car, right? So if the son has left behind a car, for example, the father can sell this car, right? Because the father is, in essence, looking after the best interest of the child. Because if the son keeps that car, many a times there'll be a lot of costs involved. So like the father will have to pay for the insurance of that car renewal. Likewise, if there's any other, MOT to do, if there's, road tax to pay, if there is parking permits to pay, all of that stuff, the father, and then on top of that, he has to make sure the car doesn't get stolen. So there's a lot of things that the father has to do whilst the son gone missing. He doesn't know when he's going to come back indefinitely. So all these costs will add up, right? And eventually, let's say all his costs add up, that the father kept the car, then eventually the son comes back after so many years and he slaps a bill on him. He says, here you go, you have to pay £10,000 back to me because I've been paying your insurance for this many years. The son will say the car was only worth so much, it was only worth £2,000, you should have sold the car. I'm not going to pay you £10,000 for a car that's worth only £2,000, right? Obviously he has to pay, but the point is that the father shouldn't have taken the cost up to that much. He should have just sold the car at even 2,000, and then he could have kept that money. When the son comes back after so many years, he can give him the 2,000 and he can go buy a new car. So it only makes sense for the father to sell. So the idea is the father has the right to sell the movable ones, because that movable item may not be something which is something that you can safeguard properly. So therefore, once he has then sold that car has now converted into money. Now that you have money there, which is the category of your right, the father's right, for example, if the father is owed nafaqah, the father can now use that money. So that is if the son, we prayed before, has left behind something which is from the same category as their right. We did the same ruling for the wife. The concept is the same over here. But if the son had left behind, for example, a property, a house or something, then the father can't sell that to gain, nafaqah of his, right? Because that is something which is safeguarded on its own, meaning the house, the property is not going to be stolen, it's not going to be taken away, right? So that's going to be safeguarded on its own. So that's why he can't sell that to then convert it into cash and then take from that cash his nafaqah. So that's not allowed. And the same ruling applies if the son's gone missing and they spend from that wealth, and obviously they can use that wealth, there's no problem. If the son comes back, they've taken their right, and if the son comes back and claims that I've already given them, then obviously they will put back into the pot. Or some have mentioned that the Qadi would have taken a guarantor before he judges from that money to give to the parents. So we've already done that concept before. And another concept here to understand is that if, same as before, if the time has passed, let's say that son was meant to give, according to Sharia, nafaqah to the parents. Let's say January, the parents were poor. The son was meant to actually give nafaqah to the parents, but weren't giving it. He wasn't giving it. January, February, March went. Then they went to court. Then the Qadi will not backdate payments. Right? We understood that already. Same thing for the wife. But here also, even if the Qadi had stipulated a certain amount, that you have to give this much amount, and time passes and he still hasn't paid that, then when he goes again, the father goes again to court, for example, or mother again goes to court, then you still can't backdate payments. There's a difference between this one and the wife's one. You see, the wife's one, she can backdate payments because now the amount was fixed, isn't it? The amount of payments were fixed. But for the parents or for the children even, or for any other relative besides the wife, you can never backdate payments. Why? Because there's a conceptual difference here. The difference is that the wife is given nafaqah as jaza'ul ihtibas, meaning, remember, prayed this, she was given nafaqah because she is being confined to his marriage and she's being confined to him. So that was always there. So he owes her nafaqah for that. But with the parents, there is no such thing. He owes them nafaqah. Why? Simply so that he can keep them alive, right? Because it's husnul mu'asha is to stay and with goodness with them. So it's nothing to do with a payment that is in lieu of something that they're giving to him or anything. Whereas the wife's one is slightly different. So here in the parents' one, the only reason he has to give them is to keep good ties with them in order to keep them alive. And somehow, however it was, up till now, they have stayed alive, right? So the idea is the nafaqah is due bitariq al-kifaya, by way of sufficiency. And somehow they have been sufficed up till now, they have stayed alive. So the Qadi will just tell him that, look, pay from now, right? Even though a few months ago he already stipulated upon him, but somehow from that time till now, their sufficiency was done somehow. That's why they're still alive. So that's the idea, that the whole concept is different when nafaqah of everybody else besides the wife comes in. That their nafaqah is due by way of sufficiency. You just have to suffice them. Whereas the wife is due because of the jaza of ihtibas. So that was always there, so you're going to have to pay for that. So hopefully this difference becomes clear here. The only time, obviously, if the Qadi had allowed them to take a debt, then obviously they can take a debt or, buy things on credit on the son's name or on their child's name. Then obviously all of that will be given, whatever it was, all of that backdated will be given because they've already taken that debt. So now that brings us to a close on all the masail regarding nafaqah. The last few masail in the Quduri, it simply just goes through slave masail. The master having to look after the slave and spend on him. This is not important because there are no slaves nowadays, so we'll skip this part. Alhamdulillah, we finished this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all beneficial knowledge and accept what we have learnt, and grant us the ability to understand and comprehend and pass this on to others as well. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah bless you all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So we come to our summary now. So firstly we did that the child, nobody would share the responsibility of paying that child's parents besides that child. The child is the one, or the children, if there's more of them, they will all share the responsibility of paying their parents, right? They can't tell other relatives to join in to pay as well. And the children are all equal, whether it's sons or daughters, in having to pay their parents. They pay equally, but like we said, provided that they are able to. Then we talked about who is owed the nafaqah. So we said that it has to be a minor. Firstly, it has to be poor. They have to be poor. That's the first criteria. Then from poor we go to, it has to be minor. So if it's minor, male or female, they will get nafaqah, right? Then if they are not minor anymore, but they are actually mature, then they have to be female. So all females will get it. Then if they are not female, then they're going to have to be disabled or blind or something, and then they will get it. So these are the criteria of when the person will get nafaqah. Okay, if they don't fit that, then they will be told to, in essence, go work and pay for the nafaqah themselves. Then we said that it's going to be necessary on relatives that are besides the children, likewise besides the father or something. It's going to be necessary upon them according to the share of inheritance that they are receiving. They will pay according to that. We clarified that ruling where we mentioned that the mother and father both will pay the older sons and the older daughters nafaqah, but that's not true. The older son who's disabled, obviously, but that's not true, that the father is the one who pays fully, and that's the fatwa we said. Then we went through the general rules. Okay, I'm not going to repeat all the general rules, but we went through the general rules where there is, when we prayed that if there is the furu only, and there is furu with hawashi. So when there's furu, then you don't really consider hawashi anyway. So that's why this is the same ruling as where there's only furu. So that one makes sense, hopefully. Then the next rule was where there is furu and usul, or there's furu, usul and hawashi. But remember, when there's furu, hawashi are not considered anyway, so it doesn't really make a difference. So furu and usul, conceptually you can understand that what happens there. We talked about that. Then we talked about if there is usul only now, right? And then we talked about if there's usul and hawashi. So those were the rulings. And then obviously we talked about, lastly, logically, if there's only hawashi, then we talked about that as well. So all of these rulings hopefully should have been clear now in terms of order. Then if there is difference in religion, there's no nafaqah. The person has to be able to afford it. And what we meant, we talked about what it meant by have to be able to afford it. So after their expenditure, there's some left over. Okay, and according to how much is left over, they're rich in accordance to that much. So they're able to give that much at least. So in essence, if, for example, after all the expenditure, there's £10 left over, they can give £10 at least. That's the idea. So they're rich £10 worth at least, because that is beyond their needs. That's beyond what they need, because that's how much is left over. So they have to give that much at least. So they're rich in accordance to how much is left over, and that's the fatwa ruling. And then lastly, we went through, if the son's gone missing, parents can use that money of the son, because of antu malika bibik. We talked about that. Likewise, the father can sell the movable items to protect, not because he wants to get his nafaqah, but to protect the what do you call it, the mal, the movable item it is, that to give it protection. And now that it's converted into money, then the father, because now there's money there. So just like the previous ruling we learned, if the child has got money there, then the parents can use it. So they can use that for their nafaqah. And the qadi can also stipulate from the wealth that the child has left behind in the possession of somebody else, that the qadi will stipulate the nafaqah for the parents from that money, just like for the wife he did. and he will obviously take a guarantor for that. We talked about that as well. Now, what was important here was a conceptual difference between the parents' nafaqah, meaning the wife's nafaqah, should we say, and everybody else's nafaqah. So the wife's nafaqah is due to jaza of ihtibas, so she will always get the backdated payments as long as it was fixed, whereas the parents' nafaqah is bitariq al-kifaya, you have to suffice them. So there's no backdated payments, because up till that date when they're claiming backdating payments, when they're claiming it, somehow they've been sufficed. So obviously there will be no backdating of payments. So hopefully this was all clear. I hope that these sessions have all been beneficial for everybody. Allah Ta'ala bless you all for listening, for taking part, and make dua for me as well. Allah Ta'ala bless you all, look after you all, grant you all ilm nafi', look after your families as well, and look after you in life and hereafter. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.